The Suicide Squad was one of my most anticipated movies of this year, and why wouldn't it be? It's a super fun comic book premise that I felt was heavily underutilized in the 2016 version, and it seemed now under the direction of James Gunn it would be exploited to its full potential. So, did it live up to the hype? Let's talk about it.
Can do the job for free. So this is the famous Suicide Squad.
That answer would be yes, the Suicide Squad did live up to the hype for me. That is not to say it doesn't have some flaws, which we'll get to, but walking out of this, I was pretty much entirely satisfied with this experience. It gave me pretty much exactly what I was hoping it would, and then some. And it is definitely my favorite DCEU movie to date. A lot of DCEU movies that I feel like I have an asterisk next to. Like, yeah, it's fun because it's so ridiculous and goofy, but there haven't been many that I feel like I could genuinely recommend just completely on their own merits as a film, and this would definitely fall into that category. The Suicide Squad is hilarious, action-packed, well-paced, and a boatload of fun. I am going to go into spoilers now pretty immediately, just because this is sort of a hard movie to talk about without getting into spoilers right from the get-go. So if you haven't seen it, I'd suggest clicking off. 3, 2, 1, cool. This movie's cast was stacked, and that was a lot of fun with this premise, because no matter how big of a star they were, whether or not they were in the first film, no one was safe from dying in this. Except for, probably Harley. And the movie did a great job of hammering that point home and setting itself apart from the last Suicide Squad by being like, hey, in that movie that premise was used once and no one else died, except El Diablo. Well, guess what?
This ain't that kind of movie, bruv.
And while I maybe would have liked the deaths of characters to be more spread out throughout the film, rather than just a ton at the start and then the others towards the end, it was still a fun and gruesome way of establishing the premise and the style of movie this would be. Especially with killing off Captain Boomerang. I do feel like I thought they would do that, but still, as a returning member of the first film, to see him brutally murdered immediately was pretty effective in setting up the vibe for this film. Also, real quick, I gotta call someone out that I never thought I would, and not that it's a huge deal, but Mr. Sunday Movies, as many of you know, my favorite YouTuber ever, the GOAT of movie YouTube in my opinion, putting out a video 2 days after a big film was released with just a flat-out spoiler in the title and thumbnail. Come on, dude, that's pretty poor. Like, I get it, a lot of characters die in this film, but that doesn't change that you just straight up spoiled one of them, just flat out, like no subtlety. I know it's a better thumbnail than something more vague, but a slightly less clickable video is, in my opinion, a sacrifice you should make as a movie channel to not spoil something for your fans, myself being one of them. So, I still love your videos and the podcast. This in itself was a fun video when I did watch it. I just want to say, come on, that's not cool. But anyway, back to the video. And on the note of the tone, this movie had the perfect tone for these characters. It was one that I thought it would be when James Gunn signed on and we started seeing some promotional material, and god damn, it works so well. A rated R, grimy, darkly funny tone, a bit in the vein of Kick-Ass or The Boys, but more stylized. A 60s, 70s war movie kind of vibe to some of it. It is exactly what this group of characters should be used for. Not for a pretty generic hero movie where they occasionally say, we're the bad guys. A bunch of actual horrible criminals, psychopaths, and some decent people have to go on this violent mission for the government. And it was executed so well, and James Gunn is able to find the humor in that. In terms of the main cast members, this is my favorite Harley Quinn performance from Margot Robbie we've seen so far. I found it a little hit and miss in previous films in terms of walking the line of playing this character really well and then being a bit grating. In this one, I found her performance pretty funny most of the time, and it hit the mark for me more than it had previously. Plus, she gets some badass action. She just feels less gimmicky and more like an actual character in this. I actually really like Joel Kinnaman in the last movie. Even though there isn't much to his character, he's a relatively good guy with this attitude of, well, I gotta deal with this weird bullshit. Might as well try to make the best of it in a kind of tired, nonchalant way.
Deadshot. Guy shoots people. He's a crocodile and he eats people.
It was pretty charming and fun. And he brings a similar energy to this film, with some added depth to his character. And his death was genuinely a little emotional. Idris Elba is pretty perfect as a badass gunslinger who's also kind of over all of this for most of the film. Very likable performance. David Desmalchin is very funny as Polka Dot Man. Daniela Melchior is pretty great and funny. Sylvester Stallone gets to finally have his Vin Diesel type performance for King Shark, who is a character that in the trailers I thought his jokes would get a bit old, but they were really quite funny and kind of wholesome in the movie. And John Cena, as I thought he would be, is perfect as Peacemaker. As soon as I found out who Peacemaker was, a character who loves peace so much he's willing to kill for it, come on. You immediately know James Gunn was going to have a ton of fun with that, and John Cena was going to have a ton of fun with that. And I especially enjoyed his dynamic with Bloodsport. The scene of them going through the camp is probably my favorite scene in the whole film. It's excellent action, it's funny in that gruesome way, like John Cena just chopping up a guy like he's a roll of sushi was so brutal and hilarious, and the conclusion of it genuinely made me laugh out loud. Quick reminder here that if you're enjoying this video, drop a like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts on the Suicide Squad down below. Also a little announcement, I now have a BHL Hudson TikTok, because why not? Check it out, at BHL Hudson. The action as a whole is pretty phenomenal as well. We've talked about the gore, but it's very well filmed and choreographed and edited. The hero's different powers are used well, and they are unique throughout the film. Cough, cough. There's also a nice variety of action. Cough, cough. It's fantastical, but still somewhat grounded. It's basically exactly the kind of action you'd want from the Suicide Squad, with pretty flawless visual effects all around as well. I also love the soundtrack, because unlike the first film, the music doesn't just feel random, or like it was chosen literally like word association, just the first song that comes to mind. It feels much more purposeful, and the songs fit their scenes so much better. And the score is pretty good too. Speaking of visual effects, Starro being in this, I also kind of loved, because it's just such a weird, insane premise, and although I wasn't a big fan of the Suicide Squad facing a giant alien threat and would have rather had more grounded stuff, which we also did get, the way it was done here worked quite well, and it fit this movie just being weird and insane and goofy and comic booky, but still somehow grounded. Grounded is probably the wrong word here, but I don't know, I sort of loved it. For such a goofy villain, they do a good job of also making it pretty gross, I guess is the right word, or not just entirely comedic. You take it seriously in that final battle. The film is very funny, has great violent action, and I thought the story was quite well written and overall well paced. It came together much more as a coherent movie than the last one. And the US government reveal at the end was actually pretty interesting. I enjoyed that this movie also explored the absolute brutality of Amanda Waller more, and her callousness to human life and what she's willing to do to achieve her goals. It was a better fleshing out of that character than we'd seen before. Also, I liked in this that Waller's team is kind of incompetent or indifferent. It fits the vibe so much more for the Suicide Squad, this version especially. In the first film, they had these big boardrooms and we're talking about the president and Superman and all this stuff. In this one, how expendable this team is really comes through with these people's lack of interest in them and their mission and their carelessness. It's just another day on the job. Kind of cabin in the woods type vibes. I like that this isn't a secret superhero mission, it's a covert mission of criminals to do some dirty work for the government, and they treat it as such. And that also led to some funny moments as well, like the team not checking if Weasel could swim at the very start. Hilarious moment. Also, speaking of comedy, I just love that the whole Milton bit was made so much better by the fact that literally seconds before he was shot, Freddy leaned over to me in the cinema and asked, "Who is that guy who's with them?" Really, there are only a couple of things that I didn't like here, and surprisingly for a James Gunn movie, it's mostly the character writing and the arcs. Because while not awful, I found quite a few of the character moments felt a little bit rushed, even as if certain things had been cut out leading up to them. And I get it, a movie is a bit of a balancing act. Like in Guardians 1, you can say, yeah, the villain is pretty underdeveloped, but that gives more time to develop the protagonists and the dynamic between them. In this, it feels like some more effective character building was traded for the fun action and comedy. And I'm okay with that. I love that aspect of the film, and it's not so egregious that the emotional parts are terrible, but I do have to mention that none of them really hit home in the way I think the movie wanted them to, for me at least. The closest was the Bloodsport Ratcatcher story, but even that felt a little bit rushed to me. I mean, Ratcatcher's big final moment was decent. None of the moments made me cringe or I thought it was really poorly handled. It made sense in the film's world, and it was a pretty cool moment, but just hitting those emotions didn't do a ton for me. I did, however, believe the team dynamic growing, and the moment when they all turned against Waller, that was all great. That didn't feel forced, that didn't feel rushed, that hit home perfectly. Just some individual character arcs fell a bit flat for me, which was a little surprising for me considering Gunn made two of the most emotionally resonant MCU movies. But to be fair, this is a very different kind of film, despite some of the seemingly obvious similarities. Also, I did feel there were a couple of moments of dead air in the film, especially one where it was so fun and exciting, and then I felt like it came to a grinding halt with the Harley love scene stuff, and that whole subplot. Otherwise, I thought it was very well paced, but that part of the film just felt strangely unnecessary. I get what it was going for, but the comedy didn't really hit for me in that part, and it was genuinely a bit more confusing than anything else. I could hear people in my cinema kind of whispering to each other, like, what's happening when that was going on. And again, maybe I feel like something was cut, or this was just a moment that was crystal clear in James Gunn's head, but translated to the screen didn't really hit the same way. It wasn't terrible, and it's a little bit of a nitpick, I'll grant you, but I feel like that could have been cut or turned into something else. But all in all, The Suicide Squad is so much fun. It's pretty much exactly what I was hoping this film would be. An over-the-top, weird, hilarious, violent time. Also love the use of color in this, by the way. Which, despite some of them feeling a bit rushed, also has decent emotional moments in there. Also lots of really badass moments in here. The one that comes to mind is Peacemaker and Bloodsport's final showdown. Just lots of cool, awesome moments sprinkled throughout this. I feel like this won't do very well at the box office. I mean, even if there wasn't a pandemic, rated R, and it's so weird. But hey, I'm really happy they let James Gunn make this despite that, because this truly feels like his vision, and I really, really enjoyed it. I'll give The Suicide Squad an 8.9 out of 10, and here's how my rating system works for those who don't know. And also here's how I'd rank the DCEU movies. So, those were my thoughts on the Suicide Squad. Do you agree or disagree with my review? Let me know all of your thoughts down below in the comments. While you're at it, be sure to like this video, check out my Instagram and Twitter at BHL_Hudson, my TikTok at BHLHudson, check out this podcast about movies and TV shows and whatnot that I do with a friend of mine, it's called The Poorly Planned Podcast, and subscribe for more videos like the one you just watched. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.